penny for your thoughts.
Laugh it up, fuzzball.
Hey, Dragonkind! Welcome to a pre-recorded panel for the amazing and wonderful Star Wars track. We are here, in case you didn't know, to talk about the Handmaidens in Star Wars who come from the planet Naboo, which I feel like some people who were wrong didn't really know much about them until what was the year 2019 when a little book came out. But then there's a lot of us who have always really loved the Handmaidens. And conveniently enough, 3 of us are here today to talk about them for you guys. So actually, I'm going to start with doing introductions. EK, would you like to introduce yourself and maybe tell us a little bit about some books that might be relevant here?
Sure. So my name is EK Johnston, the author of 4 Star Wars books now. Star Wars Ahsoka, Star Wars, and then more relevant to this panel, Star Wars Queen's Shadow, Star Wars Queen's Peril, and the forthcoming Star Wars Queen's Hope, which comes out on November 2nd. And those are all, as you can imagine, stories about Queen Padme Amidala, later Senator Amidala, and the girls and late teenagers and young women that she recruits to help her take over the galaxy, really. I mean, and our hearts, the galaxy and our hearts, and generally gets up to shenanigans.
We love some good Padme handmaiden shenanigans.
Yeah,
The best kind.
Best kind. So I'm Sarah Dempster. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Sarah Demp. And I am a Star Wars fan who has been a huge fan of the prequels since 1999. Always wanted to be Padme. Always wanted to be one of her handmaidens because they had the best outfits and did the coolest stuff. Exactly. And I often or usually write for a blog called 1138, and I tend to talk a lot about representation in Star Wars, including for our dear beloved Padme, who finally, after 20 years, got her own books about her and her alone.
And I never actually introduced myself despite starting the panel off. That would have made sense. Hi, I'm Bria Livornia. If you've been to Star Wars panels at DragonCon before, you've probably seen me. I am a freelance writer for places like StarWars.com. So if you've ever Googled The Handmaidens, it's entirely possible you've read my work. And aside from that, I've done some work for Marvel Star Wars, and also I write for a fan site called Tachi Station. And I'm also a big fan of The Handmaidens since 1999 because who wouldn't be? Although, let me tell you, this Battle Maiden look is very hot because it is 8 yards of velvet.
Yep.
You're fine up until 8 yards of velvet.
Yeah. There's no halfway measures in those costumes at all.
No.
It's always so funny to me when I look at the original trilogy and they're like, oh, we found these Levi's, and then the Padme costumes are like, we found this antique bedspread from the Edwardian era.
And then we use it to make a wedding dress.
Yeah.
Yes.
Sure. Whatever you say.
I know we're not talking about the costumes here, Padme's costumes, but the thing that makes me cry every single time is when I think about how that green velvet dress that she wears in Revenge of the Sith got ruined because there was wet paint on set.
Oh no.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, now it's on the cover of Queen's Hope, so at least we'll always have that. I love that dress. That was actually the first Padme cosplayer I ever really saw at Celebration was in that costume. Yep.
Oh, that's so cool. I feel like that's one of the ones that doesn't get done enough.
I think it's because it's one of the pregnant costumes,
Mm-hmm.
and so people feel a little bit weird doing it. Also, it's a lot of velvet.
Yeah, again.
And cons tend to be in warm places.
Okay, but when have cosplayers ever made smart decisions about the costumes we wear? And I say this as a cosplayer who
could not be me.
Could not be any of us.
That's true. That is true.
Okay, so how about we start with talking about, we all said we watched Phantom Menace at our respective young, influential ages and immediately fell in love with it. So did your love for the Handmaiden sort of go hand in hand with you watching Phantom Menace and or Padme, or is that something you sort of found a little bit later on?
I would say a definite yes. I've told the story 100 billion times, so I'm sure that everyone no one is going to be surprised by this, but Phantom Menace actually came out on my 15th birthday. So when I went to the movie theater, it was like, here's a 14-year-old queen and all of her friends who can shoot stuff and fight and like are really smart and really snappy dressers. And I was like, thanks, George Lucas, best birthday present ever. So it was always kind of Padme and the Handmaidens. And I guess in my heart, Sabe was really the Wedge Antilles of episode 1. And I was kind of hoping, should have been. And I was kind of hoping that she would be that character moving forward. But then she wasn't, because unfortunately, Padme is not the protagonist of the second and third movies. She's just the protagonist of the first one. So they kind of like move the supporting cast around a little bit, and the Handmaidens become a little bit less important because it becomes Anakin's story instead. Mm-hmm. But the Handmaidens are still there. I think sometimes people don't really know what to do with them. And that's part of the fun. It was something I got to like subvert in the books. I remember going through Battlefront at one point and being like, how many handmaidens are even in that stained glass window? There's like 14 of them. And I was like, I'm going to use that. Like they use that to their advantage. And it was super fun to sort of get to go through all of the iterations of handmaidens, including a new kind of twist on them in Queen's Hope that I hope people like.
I mean, you just want to slide that book into my hands now. I want him back. No.
Well, I don't actually have one. Or I would hold it up and be like, ha, 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 ha. But yeah, so because as Padme's relationship with the Senate changes and as her relationship with Anakin changes, the handmaidens have to do different things. And so we got to do that a little bit in Queen's Shadow, where you have her like senatorial handmaidens. And I got to do that a little bit with Queen's Peril, with the original 5. And then I got to do it again in Queen's Hope, where it's like married lady setting up a court that maybe she has to keep a few things secret in. So it was kind of another step on that. And I also talked about people who might choose to not be handmaidens, which was interesting.
I have so many questions I want to ask you, and I know you can't answer any of them, and it's absolutely killing me. Like, I just want to know if Dorme's coming back. She's been one of my favorites, and I know you can't answer it, and you won't answer it, but...
Well, that's the thing I'm looking forward to about Queen's Hope, is because I know that they had 2 handmaidens in Revenge of the Sith that I don't think ever made it to screen.
I think Mochi was in the Senate.
You can see them in the back.
They were in the back, yeah. But you know, it was because it was so funny when I first watched Phantom Menace. You know, I was 99, so I was 7 years old, and I had grown up, you know, reading Tamara Pierce, reading American Girls, and so like for me, seeing a whole group of women was just like, that was just expected. I was like, this is awesome. This is just another thing for me to play on the playground. And it wasn't until I got older that I really kind of appreciated how unique that was in Star Wars.
I think it was the first time I'd ever seen it in a movie, period.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Yeah.
In an action movie. It might have been the first time I ever saw it.
And and that is, you know, as you were saying, Kate, about how she's kind of the protagonist of the first movie, but then obviously Anakin's story is the one that takes over. And
damn it,
Anakin. And you know, and as a result, we see her with this huge group of people, and this one figure who's like, you know, all the supplementary material calls her best friend, you know, her and Sabe. And then we see 2 of her handmaidens die at the beginning of Attack of the Clones, and she's got like Dorme, but then she's all by herself in Revenge of the Sith, and we never see any, you know, that camaraderie that we had in the first 2. That sort of, it just dropped off, and that's, I think, one of the biggest tragedies of her story, whether
100.
Intentionally done so or not by George Lucas, is that she went from having this huge group around her to support her and be her confidants, to standing watching the Jedi Temple burning by herself. And yeah,
I think it's so interesting. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. I sitting on Star Wars Secrets is always the worst. So every time I'm allowed to say anything, I just like troll Twitter for fun, because it's the only way I get through. And so somebody had tweeted something, and I was like, oh yeah, that balcony scene has haunted me for years. And then everyone was like, oh no. And I was like, yeah. I think I wanted to write how she gets there. And I think that's one of the things that made Queen's Hope the hardest for me, was that I had put so much into the handmaidens, and I had avoided writing the story as a tragedy for a really long time. And like, you know, it's a tragedy because you know what's coming. And Queen's Hope was where I had to really sit down with myself and be like, okay, this one's going to be a sad. And it has the Star Wars kind of like hopeful ending, obviously, because I'm not a monster, but I am.
Hold on, wait a minute.
However,
I would like to object to
it
that.
does
I read the epilogues of both Queen's Hope and Peace Carol, and those were very, very mean, Kate.
But they were hopeful.
They were
And they made me
bittersweet.
cry twice in
So this-
public.
Yeah, so this one was hard because I had to be like, every time she would fall back on a friend, she has to fall back on like herself. And writing the Handmaidens, sort of starting to act more independently and what that means, and what it costs them to do that. So I really got to go with Sashay and with Sabe in this book, and the two different directions they have taken. The others are in it variously, like flitting through the screen or whatever, because you only have so much time. But I wanted to focus on those two because they've kind of been the two that I've been carrying with me the longest, in terms of my own sort of emotional storytelling. And so working with those two as like, who are they when they're not the Queen's shadow anymore? And what does that mean? And also, P.S., there's a war going on. So it's not like it's an easy time for anyone. It's not like they're retiring and like living by a lake somewhere. This takes place at the very, very beginning of the Clone Wars. So everything is like all the time and nobody really knows what they're doing. And it was interesting to sort of take the Handmaidens in that moment, because we've seen them be super competent and we've seen them in their like learning arc. And because it's a YA novel, you kind of have to do the like coming of age thing over and over and over again. And even though they're older in this one, they still kind of have that thing where like, what are they doing and how are they going to move forward with their new relationship with Senator Amidala? And so it was kind of interesting / depressing to get into that and to kind of unpack it and to see what it means. And there's a couple characters that I introduced, obviously, specifically to be like, this is not a handmaiden, and let's see how they handle it, because that's how you build story. But it was nice to bring back some familiar faces, and some new faces, two of which I'm super proud of. I'm proud of all of them, but I'm really proud of those two. And a couple of Wookiees, because what's Star Wars without a couple of Wookiees? And a character I based on my niece, because she's adorable, and every ship should have a gremlin.
I'm so excited, and I wish we were like able to fast forward into the future so we could have read this book already.
Right, exactly.
2 more months.
Which just means that the Star Wars track is going to have to let us come back and talk about Padme and the Handmaidens again next year.
Once there's no spoilers or secrets we have to worry about.
Yes, there'll be no secrets, just screaming and excited yelling, and we're all fine here now.
We do that anyway.
That's a good point, but like it'll just be. I was gonna ask, so like, does everyone? I'm assuming we all have a favorite. Like, you know, we love all our children equally, but we care for one of them more than the other, probably. So, and I'm guessing a lot of us, Sabe is probably their favorite. So if you're gonna say Sabe, say another one. Mine is Sabe, obviously. And my second favorite has always been Dorme. What about you guys? Do you pick favorite children?
I mean, I really love Dorme a lot, but it's got to be Sashay. I realize I've ruined her life several times over, but that's the price of being a main character. And I just remember someone was asking me, like, what do you think happened after, like, the Empire came to Naboo? Like, what do you think happened to Sasha? And I was like, please don't ask me that. All of my answers are terrible. So when she showed up in the Vader comic, and like, you know, they drew her with the scars and she gets to say her piece, and Yane's not there because she's the designated survivor, which I didn't even tell Greg Pak. He came up with that on his own. Like we both knew it, and like it was a solution we both came to separately. But like, just to see her and be like, I didn't have to worry about that, but she's alive. Like, I don't have to worry about the details. I think that's probably was my biggest like whew in Star Wars. I'm like, yep, she's alive. I don't know how, don't ask me how, but
yeah, but how much did all of us panic when we like got to those pages in the comic and we're like, oh no, there's Vader and it's all of them, and oh no.
The page that I panicked on actually was the Tonra page after I finished freaking out, because that's only the second time I've seen one of my characters like illustrated.
Oh really?
Yeah. Somebody else drew
one of the Inquisitors,
Inquisitor
right?
into the earlier Vader. So this is only the second time I've seen. Even though Tanra's technically from the movies, I consider him mine. I got to name him.
You just borrowed Richard Armitage.
I just borrowed Richard.
He's your baby.
And so when I saw him, I was like, oh yes, and then I was like, oh no. And Greg Pak was like, I wouldn't do that to you. That's not my job. And I'm like, you're a nicer person than literally everyone else I've ever worked with.
I think I started panicking like the moment we saw a cover, and we were all pretty sure it was Sabe on there, and I was just kind of like, all right, just brace for impact.
I know. I was like, I've been hurt. I've been hurt so many times. I've been hurt so many times. I don't trust anymore.
And I was like, if there's someone I'm gonna trust, it's Greg. But also,
what if?
I'm not gonna lie, I was a little nervous. I was like, Jen, I'm gonna need those all right now. Don't you dare cliffhanger me. I need every single one of them.
Oh God.
And then I yelled at him. And then I texted him a lot to yell at him. It was pretty good.
That's fair, very fair. Sarah, do you have favorites?
Oh gosh, I always liked Rabe as a kid, and then I was always very intrigued by Corday, because when she is as the decoy in Attack of the Clones and then is killed in the explosion, and her last words are "I failed you," and and that was always such an interesting paradox to me, because her whole job was to protect Padme, and by sacrificing herself she did. So that was always very intriguing. But what I think what I loved most about Queen's Shadow, Kate, was how you gave, like, all of the handmaidens kind of had their Ocean's 11 like team thing, and so like one was the makeup artist and one was this, that, and the other. And so I really loved that Erte was the artist, because as someone who's very creatively inclined myself, I'm like, yes, that one's my favorite. So that was pretty cool. Is just being like, okay, this one, it's like the boy band. Like, this one's the pretty one, and this one's like the bad boy one. So they were all the little girl gang.
Yeah,
it's so cool though, because that dates back to like the old school fandom days. I don't know about you. Well, I know, at least I think you both know about them. Like the Royal Handmaiden Society was a very in certain circles well-known website that, like, that's how I first found out that the handmaidens even had names, because when you're 9 years old, you don't necessarily read through the credits because you're 9 and that's boring.
Not credited.
But that was where I first learned that they even had names, because none of them even get their, well, in Phantom Menace, they don't get their names spoken. And it was cool because within like the handmaiden fandom, different traits got like assigned to different people and to different characters. I remember knowing like Yana and Sache were like the younger ones, and like everyone had their different sort of specific traits, which didn't translate one-to-one for your books, but it was so cool to see that same concept get brought to life in the first 2 books so far.
From a character building point, it's kind of a nightmare, because you have like 5 physically similar people you meet at the same time who have similar sounding names when you're done with the scene, and you have to give them something that like makes them stand out from each other immediately for the readers on the page. Because like when you're watching it, you can kind of tell the difference between Sofia Coppola and Keira Knightley. Like you can see it, but it's more difficult to see the differences on paper. And from a like writing aspect, it's a nightmare because you're meeting them all at the same time. And so I literally wrote down like one thing for all of them, and then kept building from that archetype. And I very deliberately stayed away from some of the Royal Handmaiden stuff, because it's like, it was hard, because I was like, oh my God, we've been doing this for like 20 years. Like we had to go through magazines and take pictures of the magazines, and then somehow get the magazine pictures onto the internet, and then like go over them with magnifying glass. Like it was not easy back in the day, because you couldn't just like stream the movie. And like finding out who these women were and all that kind of stuff. But having that sort of resource was amazing. And so I wanted to kind of like pay homage to it, but not steal it.
Well, no, I think it worked really well, because it felt like coming home in a way, like maybe all the furniture isn't exactly where you remember it being, but you still, but like, I'm sorry. I was going for a metaphor. I was trying really hard.
I'm sorry.
But like, like it's not, it still feels comforting, and like you see everything, and you're like, okay, like these are the characters that I've known and loved for a significant portion of my life.
Yeah.
Well, and I think it really speaks to why, when this book was first announced, why I was so glad you in particular were the one writing it, because I know you had that history and that appreciation, and not saying that there are other authors who also can't write a good Padme story. Obviously we've started to see more of her, but it was just, there was something so special about like, oh, she's like one of us, and there's that, I know that there's that love there already, which was really cool.
I'm laughing because the second time I met Sarah Dempster went a little something like this. The first time I yelled at her because she was wearing a nice dress, and then she came over, talked to us for like 15 minutes, and then left without introducing herself, and I had to like stalk her on YouTube or Twitter to find out who she was.
Good job.
Yeah.
Well,
I was like, no, it was literally like some fan came up to us wearing this dress and then neglected to introduce herself. And Sarah was like, that was me, like literally within 2 seconds. Because she follows me on Twitter. So the second time I met Sarah Dempster was at DragonCon. And she was wearing the same dress because obviously. And I was standing outside the Star Wars track room with Emma and my friend Faith. And Sarah came over. And immediately she and Faith began to talk about Padme. And at that point, I'd been lying to all of your faces for like 3 days straight. And I was like, I'm going to get some water, and left. And that was like just pieced out completely, because I was supposed to announce it at New York Comic Con the next week. But then it got pushed back. Back.
That's right.
Like a year. So I went from being like, okay, I just have to get through DragonCon and Salt Lake, and then New York Comic Con will announce it. But then it turned out to be like all of them. And so, but like the DragonCon was the worst, because it was my first DragonCon or my second DragonCon. I don't remember. But I really did have to like straight up lie a lot.
Well, and the detail is the dress I was wearing was a dress I made modeled after one of Padme's costumes. So like it was just, everything all at once.
It was
my
so
favorite. My favorite thing is also how over that like year you kept taking pictures of Padme cosplayers, and none of us figured it out, because we're just like, oh, E.K. Johnston, let's Padme, we know this. Like, yeah, obviously she's chasing down Ahsoka. It's like, that makes sense. But like, yeah, her chasing down Padme makes
photographing
sense too.
Padmes for like 13 months before the book was
like,
announced.
Oh god.
The best one is from a girl was dressed as Irte. Just because she was blonde. So she's dressed as Irte in the Battle Maiden with an Ahsoka. And I was like, hey guys, can I take your picture? And the Irte was like, oh, do you want me to be in it? And I was like, yeah. And the announcement was like 4 hours later.
How many yelling messages did you get from people who were like, how were you sitting on this for so long? I mean, I know I was one of them.
A lot. The best one, you guys were all great, but the best one actually came from Brian Young, because he had made me do a panel called Politics in Star Wars. And I was like, Brian, I'm Canadian. I don't think you want me on this panel. And he was like, no, I think you'll do a really good job. And I was like, and so I literally finished the book, like writing the book, got on an airplane, read Leia, Princess of Alderaan on the plane, landed, emailed Jen to be like, we're changing Panaka. I know, I just read Claudia's book, and then had to go be on this panel with Matt Martin and Holly Frey. And so Matt knew, and the other two didn't. And we had to do this whole panel about politics in Star Wars, and I kept a straight face through the whole thing. And then the next day, Pablo Hidalgo was like, I read the first line. That was really mean. And I was like, yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, it was. It's all coming back to me now, how many things were happening over that year. Also, I'm realizing I said 2019 earlier. It must have been 2018. No, was it 2019?
No, it was 2018 because I have a distinct memory.
No, when
the book was announced.
Oh yeah, it was announced in 2018.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And then
okay,
it came out, but I started sitting on it in
2019.
2017.
Yeah, because the mean thing you did to me was ask me very nonchalant questions about Naboo in Battlefront 2. And I was and I was like, this track, Kate just wants to know about what's going on in Naboo. Like, she wants to know about the setting. That's normal. And it took me like another half day after the book got announced before I figured it out.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah.
I was like, so I hear there's some Naboo stuff in the Battlefront game.
Yeah, I was just subtle.
I was real subtle.
She was very subtle. I think I told you the entire plot of like Inferno Squad book and the game, and then I don't even know. But that's
It
not
was-
about the Handmaidens.
Yeah, it was funny. Well, it is. Yes, it's sort of about Handmaidens in a roundabout way. It's about teamwork. But I like the sort of, that's the sort of fandom that I was writing into. It's like when I did Ahsoka, I was terrified. Because I was like, it was the first Star Wars book. I was like, what if I screw it up? Blah, 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 whatever. But when I wrote the Handmaiden books, it was like, I knew who I was writing them for. It was like coming home a little bit. It was really kind of nice.
You made fun of my metaphor. And then you went with it.
I said home. I didn't say anything about the furniture being moved.
Like, people move their furniture in their houses because there's a pandemic. They have nothing better to do than
That's
rearrange their
true.
furniture.
I do that sometimes.
I know.
I will say, I think what I love the most about the books, though, is how, though they're, you know, this queen and senator, and she's doing all these big, like, you know, galaxy changing things, you still like write them as very much teenage girls who like to gossip about boys and sneak out to concerts. And possibly the first mention of periods in Star Wars ever.
It is the first mention. There's a discussion about hygiene in Rebel Rising, but it's not specific.
I don't know if I want to latch on more to the periods part or the Backstreet Boy concert, because I will never remember the name of the actual band that was in there. Because I spent the whole year after Queen's Shadow being like, I would send them to a Backstreet Boys concert if I could. And then the next book
I did. Yeah. And the best part is I had put like band name to come in the thing, and Pablo had written Imagine Varactals. And then I could never think of anything else. I was like, oh no, I'm never gonna be able to name this band. So this band was called Band Name to Come. We were in like past pages. Like we had to name this band. And my friend Dot was like, oh, I'm like reading, totally unprompted. I did not ask for this. She just came up with it. Totally unprompted, was like, oh, I've been reading all these like stuff about the Disney Star Wars Batu, blah, 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 whatever. And like, it must have been so much fun, like naming bands and all that kind of stuff. Like you just like look at a band and you're like, neurotransmitter affection. And I was like, how do you spell that? Like I literally wrote it down and was like, there's my band name. It's definitely My Chemical Romance, but like neurotransmitter affection, because you just kind of like Star Wars the band. And she just did it off the top of her head. And I was like, thanks, Dot. I'm going to tell you why this is important in like 6 months.
That's beautiful. Also, I really would like there to be an official band named Imagine Varactals in Star Wars at some point.
Listen, we'll get the petition going. I'm sure we can get enough people to sign it.
Change.org.
They can open for neurotransmitter effect.
There you go.
Perfect.
Exactly.
Perfect.
At Space Bonnaroo.
Yeah.
Oh, God. But I loved that, because like that whole section of the book for Queen's Peril, and I guess spoiler alert, by the way, in case you haven't figured it out, we're talking about everything that happens in the first two Queen's books. Sorry, not sorry. But I love that whole section. It's just it's very teenage in a way I feel like we haven't necessarily gotten to see in Star Wars as much before. Because they're going to a concert, like they're 14 years old, like 12 to 15ish. They're kids, like, and they want to go have fun. And in the midst of all this, one of them is getting her period for the first time, and Panaka, oh honey. That was the whole part where he was like, yeah, I put a blood sensor in the room, and his wife was just like, you're an idiot. It's just my favorite. I think that's my favorite thing when I was reading that arc. I think I wrote something in my copy, and I was just like, this is beautiful. Thank you.
I loved that part. I at that point, as you said, I'd been joking for like literally a year. If I got to do everything, except if I could have sent them to a Backstreet Boys concert, I would have. And then when I sat down to write Queen's Peril, I was like, Backstreet Boys concert. Like that was the first thing on the dream board of what was going to happen. And I think because it was from the beginning of my thought process, it became much more plot relevant. So you get Harley Jeffin figuring more into it. You get Sashay figuring more into it. And you get Panaka, unfortunately for him, figuring more into it. And it was kind of fun to like put all those pieces together. And even though I had kind of invented Marike Panaka for Queen's Shadow, it was nice to kind of take her back to Queen's Peril and just have her be like working a different job and watching while her husband like tries to build this thing that is immediately stolen from him. And kind of being like, what were you expecting? Like they're teenage girls, they're super devious. And sort of coming into that scene with like, okay, they're real smart. they're real dumb because they're teenagers. Like, what is the best way that can cross over? And then I was like, yep, glow sticks sneaking out at a concert. And then the glow stick turned out to be important. So, or glitter bomb or whatever it is. She gets it on her hands, and it's the reason she can't be queen at the closing ceremonies. Because and then Harley mistakes her in the hallway and blah, 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 blah. So it became much more of a like friendship mission, I guess, than I had expected. I kind of expected it to be a throwaway joke. But it turned out to be really important. And then there's actually periods twice in Queen's Peril. Once when they're on the tour and like becoming queen has like messed up Padme's body chemistry. So like she has her period early, basically. And it's worse than usual. So she's like kind of knocked down, which happens. Surprise, I'm sorry. And then the second time, of course, is with Sashay. And I remember, I think I kept it somewhere. There's a note on the thing from Pablo that's like, oh God, this is so awkward. I feel really bad for Panaka. And then every single non-male member of story group underneath is like killing themselves laughing. So there's this like wall of comments from every like non-cis dude in the story group who's like, la, 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 la. This is like the realest thing that's ever happened in Star Wars.
Beautiful. I love it.
What I love is that I feel like it just really humanizes all of them. You know, like they're trying to do this inner system mission in the Chommel sector, but then they're also like getting into fights over having crushes on people and feeling jealous.
Yeah.
And that's, you know, because it's so easy in the Star Wars to get lost in the big stuff, and humanizing them is what makes it stick.
Yeah. That's been one of my favorite, this is a weird comparison to make, but that's been one of my favorite things in High Republic with Vernestra and Wreath, because like they were friends, and now like she's a Jedi Master and he's not, and they're like, what do we do? And like, grand scheme of things, I'm more worried about the man eating trees, but like personally this is also really important, and I love the way that's like figuring into the YA books.
Yeah, let's talk about like the relationships between all of the handmaidens, because I feel like, you know, like there's a whole, we could talk about like Padme and Sabe's relationship all day long. I think, yeah, we can talk about it, but I think I will. Sorry, I'll just start crying on the floor somewhere if we talk about it too much. But I think it's interesting to look at like how Padme relates to the other handmaids, and then the relationships between themselves. Because again, like that's also your books plural are the first time we've really gotten to see that.
Yeah, it was interesting because my heart is always like big happy family, but that's not the way it ended up. Like the original 5 aren't really close to Corday and Verse. They kind of know Dorme by default just because she's been around for a while, but they're not close to Corday and Verse. And same with Ule and Molte in the new ones. Like they're a job application, so it's not necessarily like the same bond. And that was another thing that was really, for me, fascinating to write, was this like the original 5 building this like immovable force, and then the next 3 kind of like, you know, building something new. And then in Queen's Hope you kind of have this like these 2 different systems spring up. There's a Forces of Destiny short that caused me a lot of grief because Shapeshifter takes place of one of the handmaidens, and Padme doesn't notice. So like she doesn't recognize anything. And then after the shapeshifter, she doesn't recognize that she doesn't know the handmaiden. Because at first I was like, oh, maybe she just didn't know the handmaiden. And I was, that doesn't make any sense. That should have twigged. But then she doesn't say anything about going to rescue the handmaiden that the shapeshifter is like stolen afterwards. And I was like, how could this happen? And it's because, you know, they just stuck a character in an orange cape. Like that's just how they did it for storytelling purposes. But for me, whose job it is to like explain that kind of shenanigan, I wanted to sort of dig into how that might happen, how that Forces of Destiny short might have come to pass. And since we know what happens during the Clone Wars, I kind of got to write that section a little bit. So as much as I would want to write that, like, you know, big happy family where they all know each other and like they call each other every weekend and all that kind of stuff, I had to sort of break them into little subgroups, which of course presents its own interesting things, because that gives me the opportunity to do like Salbe and Dorme are my favorite combo to write, because in a lot of ways Dorme does things that Sabe can't do, and vice versa. But they never actually work together. They're always brought in. Sabe's always brought in to be the queen or the senator, and then Dorme never really works with Sabe. She always works with Amidala. So it was kind of interesting to kind of play around with that a little bit. And then I really loved, as depressing as it was, I really loved writing Corday and Dorme and Versailles together. And I knew that it was going to be sad. And it wasn't until I was writing Dorme and Queen's Hope that I realized how sad I had accidentally made myself. And kind of going through and being like, Dorme, like all of her friends are dead. Like that sucks. And now she has to hire their replacements, like hire and train their replacements. And like that kind of, so I kind of got to go into that a little bit and why Dorme might be like a little bit closed off at the beginning of the Clone Wars and that kind of thing. So it's really kind of giving them time to develop those moments, even if it doesn't show through on the page necessarily. Obviously the original 5 are probably the closest. But Dorme doesn't really have the option because of the explosion. So that there's that little kind of sad note as well. And there is another comic where Dorme and one of the new ones, I don't remember which one.
It is Age of Republic. It's Age of Republic, Padme Amidala by Jody Hauser. Okay,
it's probably behind me on the shelf. I have read it. I'm just real bad at remembering this kind of thing.
I just remember because I wrote the Padme.
Because you wrote the essay for it. So. Yeah. But Dorme goes on a mission with one of the new ones, and you can kind of see the difference there than in the Greg Pak scene, for example, where you have like the 5 and Dorme. And so it was kind of, and like I'm saying, the 5 and Yane is not even there, right? Like, so you kind of have that kind of group, but the difference in the dynamics. And so it was fun to write. I do like writing the scenes with more than one of them present. But sadly, they're in a tragedy by the time Queen's Hope rolls around, so they don't have as many opportunities for bonding.
I want you to know I've now like managed to, well, I sort of said one of them, but I've now clamped down on 2 musical theater references over the course of this panel. And I'm just like, all right, I'm just gonna keep it cool.
I respect.
This might be a spoiler or it might not be, but is there any pairing of the Handmaidens that you wanted to, or you would want to write that you never got to have the 2 of them interact on the page?
Like just to
like have like an extended, like, you know.
I think I kind of got all of them. There's one scene that I skip. It's not actually in the book. I hope somebody does fan art for it someday because it's hilarious in my head. It's just beautiful. And it's Irte and Dorme and Typho.
Ooh.
Good combo.
Yeah. And it's not like an action scene. It's a shenanigan because shenanigans are fun. And I hope somebody draws it. I'm putting that out there right now. I hope somebody draws it because I think it's funny.
Okay.
You heard it here first.
Yeah. Make a note, tweet it.
Yeah.
And then in 3 months, come back and tag EK once you finish your drawing.
Yeah.
Let's see what. Let's talk about how so many of the Handmaidens are queer and how freaking excited I was about that.
I think part of it came from, again, they all had to look like Keira Knightley.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't want to write like 5 straight girls. I don't even know what that would look like. I don't think I don't know if I've ever seen 5 straight girls together. And so it would be, I think because I can't make any of them really look different. Like Rabe is a little bit different and they talk about covering it up with makeup, and Versa is a little bit different and they talk about how they can't cover that up with makeup. But in terms of writing characters of color, that really wasn't an option in the Queen's Shadow books for a variety of reasons. But when it came to sexuality, it was a little bit more open. And I took full advantage of that. I always knew the 2 of them were going to hook up. And I kind of picked Sasha and Yane because way back in the day when I made my like very original proposal, and Sasha and Yane are the 2 that get left on the planet. I had made like I had pitched a story about them in the camp. And or that was the story, that was part of the story I had pitched, was them at the camp. So that was part of my very, very first pitch to,
like for Queen's Shadow?
No, when I pitched,
okay.
before I pitched Ahsoka, when I sent in my cold call
Oh,
and was like,
okay,
you guys should have YA books, the book I pitched was essentially Queen's Peril. It changed a
wow.
lot because of stuff, but it was essentially Queen's Peril was my original
Oh my
pitch.
God.
And like 5 years later, 6 years later,
You
a while
on,
later.
you were sitting
Math
on it
is
for a
hard.
while.
I was sitting on it for a while. And I wrote Queen's Shadow first. So as I was writing Queen's Shadow, I was kind of leaving it open for myself because I knew that stuff with Sasha was coming. But I knew that Sasha and Yane were going to be a couple when I was writing Queen's Shadow, and then to go back and kind of write their super awkward crush sequences when they're like 12 and 15 was super fun. And obviously terrible things happened to Sasha in that book, but I wanted to give her something nice, if that makes any sense.
Mhm.
So like it was terrible, but at least Yane was there and Yane will understand it. And so they talk about that a little bit in Queen's Hope, actually, how when they talk about, because they take in traumatized children, right, or children who are potentially traumatized because they're orphans, and how they're like really good at that because they both have practice. Not so much the orphan side, but like the trauma side. And when it came to Sabe, I wanted to be very careful because Sabe Padme is like a huge thing, obviously. And it is something I do in fact ship myself. But when I sat down to write the book, I wanted to give Padme something that was totally independent of Anakin Skywalker. And the way to do that was to create a stupidly, ridiculously, like almost insurmountably strong friendship, platonic love story between these two girls. And so that's kind of what I leaned into, was this friendship. And I talked a lot with Jen, my editor, about it, actually, because we did have a conversation really early on, like, you know, is Sabe going to be pining? Like, are there going to be these lines? Like, they share a bed pretty frequently. Maybe they should talk about it, like that kind of stuff. And I just didn't want to do it. I felt like it would be a cheat almost, because we know, I didn't want to write their breakup, basically, is what that comes down to. I was like, I didn't want her to leave him for a dude. So I didn't want to, like, I wanted them to have this like amazing love, but I didn't want it to be romantic. And so
I'm really glad
that's kind of where it went for me. However, I was still like, I'm going to queer it up because why not? And I had the opportunity to make Sabe bi, which was fantastic. It's probably more like pan because it's a big galaxy. And because I'm me, and the way that I write characters tends to be on the reserved side, Padme does come across as a little bit demi, which I'm okay with. Because I think that makes her "oh no, he's hot" moment with Anakin like 10 times more hilarious. If it's like, because we've seen her moment with Clovis and she's like, no, literally get away from me. And like, we know she's had like weird crushes and stuff like that when she was young, like way too young to have crushes, but whatever. But we have this opportunity because of that "oh no, he's hot" scene, where you can be like, oh, he's this like kid that she's like thought of fondly in the intervening years, but then he shows up and he's Hayden Christensen and she's like, yeah. Right? Like, he's really intense and he likes me a lot and he looks like Hayden Christensen. This might be a problem, but I'm into it. And
let's go to the lake in a backless dress.
Exactly.
What could happen?
What could happen? Pairs is what happens. And so I wanted the Sabe relationship to be totally separate from that. And I wanted to but I'll always take the opportunity to make a character queer. So I'm like, they're not queer for each other, but they are both queer.
They're not queer.
They're not queer.
Yeah. They're not queer
and
together.
I really loved that there was kind of, that you didn't explicitly make it, you know, romantic love or sexual attraction. I mean, you know, you can read that into it if you so choose to, but there's a variety of interpretations, but it's still depicted as just as important as any of those. And that's something you just don't see a lot of in media in general, let alone Star Wars. And I think that's just so important that, you know, and I know some of it too is that when you're dealing with the movie characters or the TV characters, you're a little more restrained in what you can and can't, headcanon them as, so to
Yeah.
speak. And so I think that actually worked out for the better, that you could have this, obviously deeply important relationship, and you could read it. I think in my review I referred to it as like Sam and Frodo,
Yes.
because you can read
that's
it.
usually how I refer to it.
Yeah, it's like you could read it as queer platonic, you could read it as straightly platonic. It's a whole host of different interpretations, and they're all valid.
Yeah.
And people can see what they want to see in it, and find the meaning that they want to find in it, which I really appreciate. And the thing that I really love that you brought up is how there's this inherent power dynamic between Padme and the rest of the handmaidens, because they all have to be ready to give their life for her at a moment's notice.
Yeah.
And they wouldn't be there if they didn't truly believe in that. But it's a weird sort of aloneness that she finds herself in, because no one else truly knows that burden.
Yeah. And like the person who can come the closest is Sabe, because she's been the one that someone else might have to jump in front of the blaster for, and to like hold up the illusion, right? And that doesn't always work, as we saw with Corday. And so I just think it was very much an interesting relationship for me to unpack, especially where I was at the time in my career as a writer, where I was starting to get like my early books do not have a lot of romance in them. They just have really great friendships, and on purpose. And so this was when I was trying to sort of like combine the two and move the elements around and like see who was crossing lines and who wasn't, and that kind of stuff. So I think for me as a writer, it was really nice to have these two that just be like, these are going to be the most important relationship of their lives, and it's going to be platonic. Was kind of fun. And like, as I said, fandom me is like, yeah, Amidala till the cows come home. But one, I didn't want to write their breakup, and two, I didn't want to have to think about them breaking up, and three, I wanted them to be something that was separate from Anakin. And so that's basically why I took those paths. But it was, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Okay, like Star Wars in general, especially in the things you see on screen, tends to be a little bit lacking in showing female friendships. And I think that's part of why I loved it so much. I mean, granted, I'm always here for like a pair of friends who would, that very, very close bond that in Sabe's case, it's more important than her romantic relationship with Hanro, or like, she's like, I loved that whole conversation where she's like, Padme will always come first. And so for me, like that was huge, in getting to see that there. And then I think it made also a difference that we saw other queer characters there. So it wasn't just like, here's the two girls, they're not getting, one of them's bi, one of them might be Demi, like, like how you choose to read it, but they're not going to get together. Like, and that just reads so differently when you don't have also, like Yana and Sacha getting together. And this is not on topic, well, it is on topic, but like, have you ever thought about what would happen if you like one day had to meet Sofia Coppola and be like, I wrote about your character in the Phantom Menace and I did terrible things to her?
I don't know, because I think about it more in terms of Keira Knightley, because like she's quite famously often forgets that she was in Star Wars, which is fair. She was 12. That was a long time ago. If you'd asked me like something that was supposed to be hugely life altering that I'd done when I was 12, I'd be like, I literally can't think of anything.
I saw Attack of the Clones when I was 12. There we go. Done.
But like I don't know. Sometimes I do think about it. There was a moment at San Diego Comic-Con in 2019 when Natalie Portman was revealed on stage at the Thor panel, and I was like, oh my god, she's here. Oh my god, she's here. Oh my god, she's here. Lissa, can you send her a book? I don't know what happened. Anyway, so I was like, I need to find the Disney party and crash it immediately. Like I didn't, obviously, but I thought about it. And
it would have been very in character for the Handmaidens, crashing.
I would have been like,
big event.
Like, look, there's Natalie Portman, and then fainted.
Same.
Big mood. Big mood.
Yeah. You're like, oh my god, it's her. I have to leave now. Goodbye. But yeah, so I do think about it sometimes, about what it would be like to meet them, and then every once in a while something totally wacky happens, like Carol Christina da Silva messages on Instagram and is like, you write books about my character, I love that, I'm gonna do like all this art project. She tags me in everything. She follows me.
Oh,
She's
that's
like,
so
she's an artist
Mhm.
before everything else, I think. And so she does like a lot of art stuff, and she promotes a lot of other artists, and like she's fascinating, but she's been amazing. And I was like, your character was like the con artist character, or is that okay? She's like, yeah, that was really cool. And I was like,
I love
yes.
it.
So she's the only one that I've ever like interacted with.
Mhm.
I think the other person I think I would die if I met was Rose Byrne. Like I think I would just
Oh,
expire.
yeah.
I mean,
I'd be
wouldn't
like,
we
look, it's
all?
Rose Byrne. Now I'm dead. But meeting Carol Christina was amazing. She was lovely, and she's done a lot for like for the book. She does a lot of like posting. She does a lot of posting on Instagram, and of course the other person who's Kat Tabor, who does the audiobook. So they're all just so lovely. And it's really nice to kind of meet them IRL or through Instagram or whatever, and just be like, I love your work. And they're like, I forgot I did that, but thank you.
I love that Keira Christina has just sort of like come back
Yeah.
into like, like I feel like she wasn't really doing the convention scene or anything up until within the last couple of years. And so it's cool and gives me hope that like some of the other people who played Handmaidens, like with Liz Wilson, might be like, oh, I did this thing.
Please come to conventions. Kate wants to say hi.
No, but Bria, going back to your point earlier about how having Yane and Sashay as a overtly queer couple made it like so that you didn't feel like everything was riding on the Padme Sabe relationship. I think that's what I loved the most about finally just getting a Star Wars book that was just mainly focused on women, is that you didn't have the whole like, okay, well, we got to get it right because we've only got the one female character and she's got to like do everything. You could give them all the, you could have some people want to be moms. You could have some people want to go off and be science artists or things like that. And that was, I think, what I always loved the most about the Handmaidens in general, is that it wasn't just, it wasn't just Princess Leia on her own with a bunch of boys. It was a whole group of them, and they didn't all have to be everything at the same time.
Yeah, for sure. I think if there was a thing that like I talked a little bit about like growing as a writer and all that kind of stuff. And I think the one thing that I have grown into is my ability to write trans characters. And I've talked a little bit about how originally I had thought about making Verse trans. Like that was because she's the only one we don't see. There is an actress who's credited as playing her, but you never actually see her. So I kind of recast her in my head so that she could be, related to Typho. And in my mind, I was going to write her as trans. But I knew she died. And I didn't want that to be like, yay, it's the first trans character in Star Wars. She died. Like I didn't want to do that. And I think now, I don't know if I would have made the same decision. I might have like given her a more prominent role in the book. You do, as a writer, you do this to yourself constantly. But the good news is you get to write more books. So maybe buy Queen's Hope and see what happens on November 2nd.
Oh.
Maybe. I'm just saying, maybe. If you're not doing anything else that day.
Hypothetically.
I mean, besides reading your book and screaming into the abyss a little bit and crying, yeah. I'm trying to I have no idea what you're going to do with the prologue and the epilogue this time, and I'm terrified because
I've been planning this one for years.
Oh, no. We're in trouble. Especially because this was never meant to be a trilogy. Because when it was first, announced and all, it was just Queen Shadow. It was like, yay, we're getting a Padme book. And I think this was the first time that Star Wars has ever, in recent memory, given me what I want. Because in my review, I remember saying, Lucasfilm, please, 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 I would like a trilogy. Give me a prequel and a sequel. And we're getting it.
And here we go.
And I'm like, oh, sometimes Star Wars is good and gives me what I want.
Well, and I think a lot of that was the fans. Like if nobody had bought the book, there would only be Queen's Shadow, but people started asking for more immediately. And they asked me to keep writing, and I was like, I would love to. And obviously more like the same thing happened with Ahsoka, but obviously we're not doing that for different reasons. And with the Padme book, though, you have the opportunity for more, I guess, books, back material, whatever. And that was really great, but it was definitely like fan driven. It wasn't like we had to resell the idea every time. So somebody like publishing is this horrible combination of art and business, and somebody had to like look at charts and numbers and be like, I like that graph. Let's buy another one of those. And that's readers, that's fans. So I kind of like knowing that there are enough people who like Padme and me, frankly, enough to buy 3 of these books. And to have the support to publish 3 of them. Like that's incredible. I never thought it would happen ever.
So in other words, you think it would be a good thing for everyone watching this panel to go and pre-order Queen's Hope from their local independent bookstore?
It would be good. I would actually watch Twitter for the next couple of days, because there's going to be an announcement about how to get signed copies.
Oh, very
fascinating. Okay.
Although now I'm speaking forward from DragonCon, so
yeah.
Spoilers, it will have already happened, assuming I remember to tweet about it tomorrow.
So possibly go ahead and pre-order Queen's Hope from your favorite local independent bookstore, or check EK Johnston's Twitter.
Check my Twitter.
Find out about signed copies. Or do both. Really, I mean,
just buy several copies. Give them to your friends. You know.
Yeah, they make great party gifts.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure I have 2. I have at least 2 copies of Queen's Shadow, because I think I got the standard one and then also the convention edition, which became a paperback cover. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think that just really speaks to how deep a desire there was for Padme, because she's kind of one of the trio in the prequel trilogy, but we aside from Phantom Menace, we really never got any stories that were about her. But there was I think some one-off Clone War episodes, but it was always about her and Anakin. It was, her and Anakin pretty much. It was never, okay, what is she doing when she's a separate, fully realized person outside of Anakin, and, let alone giving backstories and identities and personalities to all of her handmaidens.
Yeah.
So that's
I
really
deeply
cool
appreciate that Anakin was mentioned once in Queen's Shadow and not even by name.
At one point, Jen was like, should we use his name? And I was like, nope. And I don't think Padme thinks about him once. And Sabe is like that weird kid we picked up on Tatooine, and that's it.
But going off of what Sarah was saying, though, it shows, I think it makes a big difference. I think it's, number one, it's ridiculous. We had to wait 20 years for a Padme book. But also, I think it speaks a great amount to how the fact that the prequel generation is grown up now. I remember when I first started
money stuff.
We have the money.
We're all millennials, so we don't have that much money.
We have enough money to buy. We have enough money to buy a Padme book once a year. But that, and we've also sort of found our voices more and more, because I remember I first started writing for a fan blog back in 2013, and we had to fight to get people to respect Padme. She would just be written off and ignored, and there was a New York Times article or something, and other fans.
I remember that article.
Yeah, right. Usually dudes were like, well, she's just not important, whatever. And I'm like, she's the protagonist of the Phantom Menace, for the love of God.
My favorite was that article that's she's weak because she doesn't shoot a blaster like Leia, which, one, incorrect.
She does.
And two, why is that the only metric that we can judge whether a female character is worthy of being liked and enjoyed? And why is that our only measure of strength is physical strength?
Yeah.
Also, she's the best shot.
She's the only one who doesn't miss.
She other people can't hit their damn target. She's not a stormtrooper. She actually hits things where she means to. But no, I agree with you completely what you're saying about that's why I always hate the term strong female character, because to me it's never. Strong female character tends to mean what cis dudes think is a strong female character, and it's always the same archetype.
I like complex.
Yes.
Or complicated. It's a complicated female character.
Or I just like to say well written.
Realistic.
Yeah.
I think it's capable. I say capable ladies.
That works too.
Yeah. But I think again, that's what we got to see with each group of the Handmaidens so far, is we've seen well-rounded, capable ladies. I can't remember the other words you used, but we're gonna throw it in there somewhere. But where they aren't just the one type. And yeah.
I think we're running up against the DragonCon axe.
I forgot.
I forgot. There was There was like a 5-minute warning, and I was like, "Oh, it's like we're really at Dragon Con."
Don't worry, I got it. We're in the last
Things
minute.
never change.
I miss you guys so much.
I know. So we're last minute. So any last thoughts about the Handmaidens and how much we love them?
I wrote the saddest line I've ever written for Queen's Hope.
Oh no. Well, on that note, let me go get my tissue.
I'm gonna refill this mug of tea and just cry for all of November.
It's fine.
I mean, anything Clone Wars adjacent is going to be terribly sad. So, you know.
Yeah.
Yep.
No,
Fine,
I got
also.
to the dedication for this one will really tell you my whole thought process when I was writing it. And so will the interstitials.
Ooh, okay.
Oh boy.
Oh boy.
I feel like we got to end on that note.
Yeah.
What's more around the horn? Where can people find you guys online? For me, it's Twitter at Chaos Bria.
Also Twitter at EK_Johnston, same place, Instagram, Tumblr without the underscore. I'm not really on TikTok, but I really appreciate everyone who is. You're hilarious. And I watch like an hour worth of videos every day.
Beautiful.
And you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Sarah Demp, SARAHDEMP.
Awesome.
Queen's Hope, November 2nd.
November 2nd.
Pre-order it now. Woo! And on that note, thanks guys so much for coming, or not coming, you didn't actually physically attend this. Thanks so much for watching this Star Wars at Dragon Con panel, and enjoy the rest of your con.
And tweet us your favorite handmaiden.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah. All that.